The Whispering Shadows. It was a quiet autumn evening when David Mitchell, a journalist known for covering high-profile criminal cases, found himself on a flight to a small, remote town in Vermont. He had received an anonymous tip about a string of disappearances in the area, disappearances that the local authorities had brushed under the rug. David, always hungry for a good story, couldn't resist investigating. Upon arrival, he was greeted by an unnerving silence. The town, situated in a valley surrounded by thick forests, seemed peaceful at first glance, but there was something off about it. The locals were tight-lipped and suspicious of outsiders, offering no information when David tried to ask about the disappearances. David decided to dig deeper on his own. That night, he wandered into the town's diner, hoping to overhear something useful. The old waitress, Gloria, who had been working there for decades, gave him a cold stare when he asked if anyone had heard of the disappearances. She quickly turned the conversation to safer topics, but David noticed she was nervously glancing over her shoulder. As the night wore on, a man in his late 40s, wearing a weathered leather jacket, sat down next to him. He introduced himself as Sam, and after a few drinks, the two struck up a conversation. Sam revealed he had lived in the town his whole life and hinted that something dark was hidden in the woods surrounding it. But just as David was about to ask more questions, Sam stood up abruptly, muttering something about not wanting to get involved before leaving in a hurry. David's curiosity piqued, but the night ended without further leads. The next morning, he decided to explore the woods. He followed a narrow, barely visible trail that seemed to lead deeper into the forest. As he walked, he noticed odd symbols carved into the trees, ancient markings that looked like something out of a ritual. The further he went, the more uneasy he became. The woods felt suffocating, as if something or someone was watching him. Suddenly, he heard a rustling behind him. He spun around, but there was nothing. Still, the feeling of being followed lingered. Determined to uncover whatever secret the town was hiding, David pressed on, until he stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. It was hidden deep in the woods, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. As he entered, David's breath caught in his throat. Inside, the walls were lined with photographs of people, dozens of them, each one marked with a red X over their face. The most recent photo was of a woman he recognized from the town's diner. Gloria. She was missing. Before David could process what he had just found, he heard a voice behind him. "You shouldn't have come here." He spun around to see Sam, his face pale and strained. "I warned you," Sam said, eyes wild. "You don't know what you're messing with." David took a step back. "What is this place? Who are these people?" "They're not people," Sam whispered, his voice trembling. "They're..." Before Sam could finish, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. David whipped around, trying to force it open, but it wouldn't budge. The air grew colder, and the shadows in the cabin seemed to move, slithering across the walls like living things. Then, from the corner of the room, a low whisper echoed in David's ear. "Run." He turned to Sam, but the man was gone, vanished, as if he had never been there. Panic surged through David. He fumbled for his phone, but the signal was dead. As he paced around the room, trying to make sense of what was happening, the whispering grew louder, more urgent. It was all around him now, dozens of voices murmuring in a language he couldn't understand. Suddenly, the floor creaked beneath him, and a trapdoor opened, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading into the earth. The voices seemed to be coming from down there. Without thinking, David descended the stairs, drawn by a compulsion he couldn't resist. At the bottom, he found a small chamber lit only by a single, flickering candle. And there, in the center of the room, was a figure. A woman. Gloria. She was kneeling, her eyes wide with terror, but there was something else. Her skin had a pale, sickly hue, and her mouth was agape as if she was about to speak, but no words came out. The shadows around her were alive, writhing like serpents, and as David approached, he felt the temperature drop sharply. He reached out to her, but the moment his hand touched her shoulder, she let out a blood-curdling scream. The shadow surged forward, wrapping around David's legs, pulling him toward the floor. In that instant, everything clicked. This wasn't a town haunted by ghosts. It was something far worse. The shadows weren't spirits, they were ancient, malevolent entities that had been feeding on the souls of the townspeople for decades. The ritual had been ongoing, and David had stumbled into their trap. With a final, desperate effort, David tore himself free from the shadows and ran, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't stop until he reached the edge of the forest, gasping for air, terrified. When he turned back, the woods were silent again. David never spoke of what happened that night. He returned to the city, his article never written. But every year, without fail, the townspeople would disappear one by one, and whispers of the dark forces in the woods would resurface, keeping the town's deadly secret alive. And to this day, no one has dared to investigate further.